Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to do another installment of one of my favorite series, the DIY Tarot Spread. So in this particular video, we're going to be playing with and exploring the idea of creating a guided spread. So this is kind of a concept that has evolved for me, or a reading style spread that has evolved for me over the last couple of years, where I found that there are some oracle decks in my collection that kind of span this fun little spectrum of sort of energies or colors or styles. And within that, I've been able to kind of cultivate this sort of guided reading practice where I let the oracle pick the tarot deck that I'm going to pair with it. So it's kind of a blend, I guess, of the Playing with Pairs series and the DIY tarot spreads, because we're going to be kind of doing both things in this video, where we're going to be playing with some pairs in my collection, but primarily we're going to be using those guiding cards from the oracle decks to create a spread out of that. So I guess in a sense, it's also a blend of my previous, or my very first DIY tarot series, where I talked about creating spreads out of keywords, kind of the same concept. Only this time we're going to be allowing the oracle deck to choose the tarot. So let me kind of explain a little bit about how this process goes, how it came about. This is not the first deck I've ever done this with, but one of the first decks that I've done it with really consistently. This is the Sacred Mothers and Goddesses deck by Claudia Olivios. And this deck for me has a beautiful blend of, goddesses and sacred mothers and things along those lines. But each of the cards has a very kind of specific energy, even though the art style, as you can see, is pretty cohesive across the deck, right? Like, we're not looking at significant changes in artwork or coloration or style or anything like that. It's all in the same kind of style. It's all in the same kind of color palette. Yet each of these cards, because of the goddess or sacred mother on them, each radiate with their own kind of energy in my experience working with this deck. And so that is one of the key ways in which I do a guided spread, where I'm letting that energy dictate the reading, dictate the spread, and dictate the tarot that I'm going to use. So let's just give this one a little shuffle, and then I will kind of show you how this goes. There's going to be a lot of stopping and starting for me because I do not have any tarot decks on my table currently, just the oracles that we're going to be playing with today, and I'll have to stop and grab a tarot deck as soon as we figure out which tarot deck, this oracle deck, currently wants to have a conversation with. So when I am doing this sort of guided spread, what I'm doing is looking for the oracle card to tell me what tarot deck that it feels would best explore its message or help me to understand its message. And I am very much personifying the deck right this 5 minutes, because that's just kind of my general language in working with my cards. However, it's not actually a personified practice. It is more of a looking at the messages and the energetic nature of a card versus sort of its voice or its personality. You can approach it from both ways, which is really fun. And I do have a tendency to just drop back into that personification language. So that will probably be the language that I use throughout this video, but it's important to note that that's not the only way to experience this process. So we've got our sacred mothers and goddesses, and usually when I'm doing a guided spread, I'm pulling a specific oracle deck because there's something in that deck that I feel drawn to, that I feel there's a message in there for me in this moment, or perhaps I have a specific question in mind, but I don't actually have like a spread or prompts or anything like that I want to be working with. So I'm going to go to the deck and I'm going to ask it whatever question I have, or just ask it for some general advice, some general guidance for the moment, and then I'm going to pull my card. So for this one, we got Embrace the Sacred. So I will sit with this for a minute. I might dive into the guidebook to further investigate what this card has to tell me. And I'll take all of that into account. And then I'll think about what tarot deck would best reflect this energy and this message that's trying to come through this card. So I might take a moment, and there's usually like a deck that pops immediately to mind as soon as I see a card hit the table. Sometimes I have to sit with it a little longer than others, but most of the time something jumps right to the forefront. And as soon as I saw this, the deck that jumped to the forefront of my mind was the Pythonic Tarot. So let me pause and grab that one. So now I've got my Pythonic Tarot because this deck with Embrace the Sacred Feminine, not only does it aesthetically, right, design-wise, color-wise, I feel like it has the same sort of energy the Pythonic does. It is very much keyed into the idea of sacred feminine. We have like the chalice and the moons, and all of that is very much reflected in the Pythonic Tarot deck. So I'm gonna pull that up here to the top of my mat, and I usually do this in a general 3-card reading. This is my focus point. This is the main message that these sacred mothers and goddesses is trying to relay to me. This is my guide. So then I'll take my tarot deck, the one that I feel like is meant to further expand upon this message for me today. And then I'll pull my 3 cards to help me further expand upon this message. So now these 3 cards do sometimes have a bit of a loose positional relation in the spread. So sometimes I look at it as past, present, future if I feel like I need some sort of context for each of these cards and each of these messages. So I can look at Embrace the Sacred Feminine, and I can look at that through the lens of the past, the present, and the future. I also like to look at it in terms of what I know, as in being in the conscious realm in this particular card, the center card, what's in the subconscious realm, so what I don't know, what I don't currently have access to, and what's in the higher self realm, the superconscious mind. And that's another way that I'll like to approach these if I feel like I need some sort of context for each of these. But you can also just read them as like one message together, right? In a line, in a grouping, however it is that you like to work with a 3-card spread. You don't necessarily have to have prompts for this. But in this particular situation that we've got going here on the table, with the Embrace the Sacred Feminine energy, I feel like we're kind of looking at that subconscious, conscious, superconscious energy coming through. So what do we consciously know about embracing our sacred feminine? We consciously are in that 4 of chalices. You know, we are aware that this is something that we need to bring into ourselves, that we need to sit with, spend some time with. And then what we don't know is that 9 of crystals. So maybe we don't know what's in the shadow, what's unacknowledged, is the sort of richness and fullness that can come through this practice, the material benefits, the gains from working with this practice, from working with the sacred. And then what's in the superconscious realm is really interesting. That's the Hanging Woman. It's also a major arcana card, which is really cool. So when we tap into that higher conscious self, that higher conscious mind, the super consciousness through embracing the sacred feminine, we're going to be able to kind of turn everything on its head and see this different perspective. And this is such a cool reading. I love playing with my decks in this way. And it gives me not only a great way to interact with oracles in a kind of new way and let them be the forefront, let them be the focus, and have the tarot support them rather than the other way around. It's also a really great way to kind of move through my deck collection and to work with different decks, because I'm letting the oracle deck determine what tarot I use rather than picking a tarot off my shelf and then trying to find its oracle mate. So let's do another one just so you can see how this works with the exact same deck repeated. Okay, so we're gonna just give the sacred mothers and goddesses another shuffle, and then we're gonna pull a card and see what comes out of it. Okay, so this time we have the Priestess of Divination. This is a beautiful card and completely different. I did keep this one out just so I can compare. Completely different energy to what we had in the Embrace the Sacred Feminine. And of course, as per usual, the minute I flipped this card over, there was one deck that immediately jumped to mind for me. Let me go ahead and grab that. So that deck for me was the Mystic Fairy Tarot. I do believe that's the name of this deck, because I feel like the fairies, we do have this kind of fairy sense. I see wings here. It's the color palette, it's the energy, it's the softness of the card that I feel like the Priestess of Divination is asking me to tap into that message through the lens of the Mystic Fairy Tarot, which also has a very soft kind of watercolory fairy kind of energy to it. So then I'll just repeat the process, because now I'm onto a different different reading. This is a different message. This might be a great place for me to dip into the guidebook for this particular card. There's often prompts, key phrases, things like that that you could pull out of the guidebook. That's a whole nother separate sort of practice. But I might take this opportunity to read the guidebook to see at a deeper level what this particular card has to say. And then I'm going to use my tarot deck to further expand upon that message. Again, I'm in favor of the 3-card reading. I just think it's like one of the best key foundational readings. It gives me just enough to really further expand upon the message, but not so much that I'm overwhelmed in the moment. So again, I would look at this and think about maybe what these positions might mean to me. I'm feeling more of this as like an overall message, and there's not so much a positional or a specific context for each card as I did with the guide that we had just a moment ago. And you'll see that a lot of this process is very intuitive, so this is a great exercise if you're looking to sort of expand your intuitive understanding and flex those intuitive muscles. This is a great exercise for that, because you do very much have to rely on sort of those intuitive hits and messages coming through in terms of selecting decks to go together, selecting cards, and then looking at, is this a positional based reading, or is this just an overall general message that is flowing through this priestess of divination? Now, when you're starting this process, it can be really helpful to just kind of give it some basic, keywords for your bottom spread. Past, present, future is always great. It can be really helpful, and you can use any sort of generic 3-card spread for that. But I like to kind of, again, let the cards dictate how I'm going to read it. And for this particular one, I'd probably just read it as one overall message. This is the priestess of divination and what she's asking me to tap into. We have the Knave of Pentacles, the 3 of Cups, and the 9 of Pentacles. So there you saw like 2 very different sort of energies and readings coming through using 2 totally different tarots, but using the same oracle deck. I can certainly tie into the energy of the goddesses and the sacred mothers in this way, but it is just a way to also create an energetic sort of guide. So let's step outside this sort of goddess energy and get a little bit more generic. So our next guide that we're going to play with is the Enchanted Map. Now this is the newer edition by Colette Baron-Reid. And again, we're gonna repeat the same process. I'm just gonna give it a shuffle this away. And I'm gonna pull a card, and we're gonna see what guide we have for this moment with this particular deck. And then at that point, I'm gonna look and think about what tarot deck it might wanna be paired with. So we're not going into specific goddesses or anything like that. We're going to fully let whatever comes up on the card dictate what kind of a reading this is. So we're going to split, and we got Coming Apart. So this is a reading then for me about how things are coming apart, and maybe what I need to be looking at is, okay, something is coming apart. What is it, and how can I put it back together? So I'm looking at this card, and it's feeling very vulnerable, but something about the broken masks is making me lean into the idea of maybe pulling in some of my a collage deck that features a lot of statues, a lot of stone faces. And because of that connection that I just made to this artwork, now, as you can tell, like I haven't gotten into the guidebook at all, so I'm going strictly off my intuitive hits with what this artwork and what this key phrase is telling me. This is like a shattering of maybe self or preconceived notions about self. So let me pause, look at my collection, and see what deck I feel like this card wants to talk through. So even though this is like a very sort of pinky, purpley, very pastel colored card, I do feel like the energy of the card is much, much darker than that. And as soon as I saw these little stone faces, like the first deck that really did come to mind for me was my Ritual Tarot, because like it's got a lot of stones and statues in it. And I feel like it's going to mirror that sort of shadowy underlayer as well. So let's go ahead and give it a little shuffle and see what it has to say. So you can see that like aesthetically, I'm kind of going somewhere a little bit different with this, although this card does, coloration wise and everything match really well, but then this feels totally outside that realm of the aesthetics that's going on in this reading currently. And one of the things that tells me in looking at this sort of guided reading here is that this may be the card that is the resolution to this, because it does feel so far outside of this realm of this original guided card. So like, again, this is such an intuitive thing and I hope it's making sense, but I feel like the coming apart, this is what's going on in a past, present, future sort of sense. And that's just what's coming to mind for me with this particular reading. But like, here's where we were in the past, which that card is supposed to be the Hanged Man, sorry. So I would be looking at these as kind of like the past, the present, and the future, right? This is what is going on and this is what we're working towards in this coming apart energy. So we're not gonna dive into each of these readings because it's really not about the reading. I'm gonna just kind of keep going through the process here. We're gonna pull cards, see what comes out, and then pair it with some tarot to see how that reading will evolve. Okay, so let's pull one more card from the Enchanted Map so we can see how this process works with this deck. You can do this, I think, with any oracle. It doesn't have to have like a vast array of different styles or themes or anything like that. And we'll take a look at a couple of specific decks next, just so you can kind of see how that works. So now we've got Magic Prayer, and I'm feeling like this card is giving me all of the connect to nature, magic, and maybe a little bit of that cosmic sort of energy. So I'm feeling the pull to something earthy yet magical. So let me pause and think about what that might be. So the deck I pulled out is actually the Forest of Enchantment Tarot, which I was thinking I might be drawn to a more photo manipulated style deck, but I feel like this is the one. It just, I mean, even the backs kind of give me that same sort of cohesive energy. So let's see what Magic Prayer we can find in the Forest of Enchantment Tarot. Let's see how this works. Two of Visions, the Forest Lord, and Four of Visions. So yeah, I feel like those go together really well. I feel like these are kind of a reflection or maybe telling me how to tap into that idea or that energy of Magic Prayer. I think those actually worked really well together. But again, completely different deck and energy from certainly from the Ritual Tarot to the Forest of Enchantment, and a really completely different energy between these two cards, especially when we use a tarot deck to really expand upon and dive deeper into the unique energy of each card. Okay, let's do a quick play with a few other decks just so we can have a little bit of fun with this concept. So let's come back around to the idea of having a specific sort of energy that you want to connect with. So maybe you have a deck that really resonates with a particular thing that you're looking to cultivate in your life. So here I have the Messages from the Spirits of Nature Oracle by Stephen Farmer. So this deck, of course, is very nature and earth focused. So let's see that is an energy that I want to tap into. We can see through the cards that we have like everything from stuff in the sky to stuff in the ground to stuff above, right? Stuff in the cosmos. Perhaps connecting with that energy of the actual world, right? The physical world. And I want to try to cultivate a better connection or maybe understanding of that. Or perhaps I want to look at what the world itself has to teach me. I can use this deck to be my guide and then see what tarot decks I want to use or it wants to work with if we want to personify the deck to further expand upon that message. So let's just give it a little shuffle and then we'll pull a card and see what comes out. So we got rice with nourishment. So I'm looking at that idea of rice, of nourishment. I'm also looking at, what kind of imagery is on the card, the color palette, how it feels, what it makes me think of. And then I'll think about what tarot deck, again, in my collection sort of falls into that category, resonates with that same type of energy. So the deck that actually came to mind for me is the Distant Past Tarot, and this deck is actually a photo collage deck, and so it has a little bit of that same kind of energy because this is photo collage, so that definitely comes to mind for me when I look at that. It has a little bit of a cosmic bent to it. I feel like the color palette exists in the same world, which is always fantastic. That makes my little designer nerd heart happy. And this particular deck also has a really kind of grounded, nurturing energy for me when I work with it. So that was what came to mind when I was looking at this card, when I was kind of pulling that energy into myself and kind of reflecting back outward on what do I have in my collection that feels like it's in the same realm. So let's pull 3 cards from this one just so we can see how this works. So we have the 7 of Cups, the Hermit, and Justice. That's really interesting. I mean, I feel like there's definitely a message here of like, you need to sort of get out of this indecision space. I'm crooked. Why didn't anybody tell me I was crooked? You need to get out of this sort of emotional indecision space. You need to take some time to reflect upon what it is that you really want and what's really going to nourish you. And then, you know, we can step into this sort of energy of actually like doing the hard work, right? Doing the thing, making the decision, committing to that sort of action. And sorry, I wasn't going to go into readings. I mean, that's a great message, right? And I feel like this deck really does reflect back the energy coming through that particular guiding oracle card. I'm going to have a hot mess of decks to clean up when we're done with this. Okay, so let's pull one more just so we can kind of see how, again, how the one deck using the same theme and the same artwork can give us completely different energetic readings. So let's pull another one. And this time we've got wind with movement. Oh, and there's a lot of bright yellow colors in this particular card. I definitely get this sense of impermanence, right? Of change, but it's change that's always impermanent. It's always growing, it's always transitioning, it's always moving. So what tarot deck feels like it sits in that space for me? So the deck I decided on was actually one of the decks that I'm working with this month, and that's the Dreaming Way Tarot, because this deck feels like it has that wind movement kind of an energy. It is a bit impermanent because I have used this deck, and I mean that in a good way, but because I have used this deck for so many years in so many different ways that I feel like it is ever changing, ever evolving, and it can be used in a variety of different ways. And so it has that idea of wind, movement, and impermanence because I never slot it into one particular role. It serves whatever role I need it to serve in the moment, which is a very different energy than what I was playing with in the Nourishment with the Distant Past Tarot. So let's pull some cards and see what we get. 2 of Pentacles, Queen of Pentacles, and 5 of Cups. So again, just looking at, you know, where am I maybe experiencing that movement and change? But again, even though I'm not maybe aesthetically creating the most beautiful pairing here, it actually might have even been better if I had used, because this is a borderless oracle deck, right? Because I'm ridiculous and I have 2 copies of this deck. I have a trimmed one and a non-trimmed version. It might have been better, and just for funsies, because we're playing, let's just pull 3 from this to see if that gives us any of a different sort of vibe or energy, which actually it totally does. When I take those white borders away, they kind of create a framework for the deck, and I have the borderless edition here. I'm definitely feeling like I'm getting a different energy, and it's funny too because now I've got all majors. So with this particular deck, this feels like it's movement and it's change, but maybe it's not as impermanent as I think it is, right? And because these are major arcana cards, these are big energy cards. So I think that's really cool how, you know, something as simple as taking a deck with or without borders, the same deck doing the same kind of work with it, can totally change the energy of the reading. I do feel like with this being borderless and these being borderless, it's actually a better match for this particular energy for this card. It feels open and expansive, and the wind is able to kind of, you know, rush across the cards, versus when I had it in the bordered one, the borders do kind of create like a barrier, so that wind would maybe brush up against that barrier or hit it. It would change the flow, right? And this is me getting incredibly nerdy with this, but that's one of the things, one of the reasons why I really enjoy this type of a reading style and this type of kind of DIY tarot spread, because it really does allow me to have a play in that kind of a world. But again, taking a look at these two cards, right? I mean, they're actually fairly similar. They have a very cohesive kind of energy. They have a very cohesive sort of color palette. They do work really well together, but I pulled, based on the tarots, I pulled completely different energies and completely different readings out of these two cards that exist within this, you know, singular oracle deck, which I think is just a lot of fun. Okay, to wrap things up, let's have a complete and utter just playtime with this particular one. We're gonna use the Field Guide to Garden Dragons, which is a fairly new deck in my collection, and I don't think I've used it very often. But I thought it might be interesting to take a little deck like this that has a very specific energy, right? We've got dragons in the form of fruits and vegetables, I do believe. You know, things found in your garden. So that is a very specific energy. So let's just see if this same guided spread works with something like this. I haven't experimented with it with this particular deck, so we're gonna do a little bit of playing with pairs here. So let's see what the garden dragons have to share with us. So we've got Gooseberry Dragon with Stealth. That's an interesting one. So let me think about, what tarot deck does this little dragon want to speak through? Now, I'm sure if I had the Dragon Tarot by the Oak, Ash, and Thorn people, is it the Smoke and Ember? I do not own that deck, but I'm sure like that deck would pair beautifully with this deck on any given day. But I don't own that deck, and I really want to kind of step out of the whole dragon world and look at this dragon in particular. What does this little gooseberry dragon want to tell me about stealth? And so I don't really want a dragon deck, because this is my dragon. So I want this dragon to be able to speak to me through another deck and share his story. Apparently it's a he, because again, I personify. So I feel like this little gooseberry dragon wants to speak to me through the world of the Forest Folklore Tarot. And I do apologize because this one is out of print, but I feel like this is the deck. This is the deck that he wants to share with me a message about stealth. And it would be really fun to, of course, dip into the guidebook and, you know, really learn more about what that keyword means in connection with this particular card. But again, we're just kind of doing a basics here, a kind of, just a kind of test run of this particular practice. I pulled two cards there. So the Gooseberry Dragon wants to speak to me of stealth through the Five of Cups, the Ace of Swords, and the Hierophant. How interesting is that? I feel like they do work really well together, and I think that that's a really good little match for that particular dragon energy. Let's pull another dragon and see what we get. I'm gonna set him aside so we can compare him to whatever little dragon friend wants to come through next. And again, this is me playing with this practice for the first time with this deck, so hopefully it will work. And this time we've got the Coffee Dragon with energy. Oh, and I do feel a completely different pull with this card. It feels very different than what I experienced with the Gooseberry Dragon. This is one of the reasons I bought this deck, was because I absolutely adore this card. And what tarot does this little dragon, who apparently in my mind is also a he, wants to speak to me through? This little coffee dragon wants to speak to me through the Mystic Palette Tarot, which is so interesting because that's not like, if I would have pulled out the Garden Dragon deck in just a general sense and I was looking through it saying, you know, what tarot deck do I want to pair with this? the Mystic Palette would not be the first deck to come to mind. It definitely wouldn't be a deck that came to mind if I was working with the Gooseberry Dragon. But for the Coffee Dragon, yeah, I feel like this deck is offering the energy that he wants to share with me. So let's pull 3 cards and see what message the Coffee Dragon has. So we have Temperance, the King of Cups, big energies, and the 5 of Wands. So yeah, interesting. So the message that the Coffee Dragon wants to share apparently is quite a big energy message. And I think this actually works quite well. So yeah, super fascinating to me how, like, you know, we can take a deck like this that is very tied into a specific sort of world and has a very set framework. And yet I can pull completely different readings and completely different energies out of it. Like this card like totally gives me, I want to get into the Tarot of the Cat people with this. In fact, let's just do that really quick because like I just want to see, and I'm having a play and we're gonna play together, because the minute I saw that card, I was like, that card wants to talk through the Tarot of the Cat people, which is a new deck in my collection, and I have to say is kind of becoming a fast favorite. So let's just give a little shuffle, and this will be the last one that we do so we can wrap things up here. But I'm just curious what the Coconut Dragon has to say. 3 of Pentacles, the World, and the 7 of Pentacles. I feel like that just works together beautifully. And I love that Coconut Dragon energy coming through and speaking through the Tarot of the Cat people just feels like it's very cohesive. But again, totally different energy than what we saw in the Mystic Palette with the Coffee Dragon, and certainly vastly different than we saw coming through with the Forest Folklore and the Gooseberry Dragon. So that's a look at kind of how I have cultivated and how I work with what I call the guided spread or the guided tarot spread. And it's definitely about letting the oracle deck be the foundation of the reading and choosing tarot decks that support it rather than the other way around, which is really how I work with my tarot and oracle most of the time. But this particular practice works really well. I can use it when I want to connect with specific energies. So if there's, you know, specific sacred mother or goddess, or I just want that energy to come about and I let the deck decide, you know, I pull a card and in a sense, let the deck decide what energy I'm going to be tapping into. And then from there, I will figure out what tarot deck feels like it's in alignment with that energy. I can use it in a much more broad way where I can use something like the Enchanted Map, where it's not necessarily, you know, rooted into one particular theme. I mean, I guess there's a sort of loose theme about that kind of, I don't know, finding your direction, I think. Couldn't even tell you, I haven't read the guidebook, but it feels like a much more broad spectrum oracle where, you know, we've got a variety of types of energies and keywords. So if I'm not really sure what I need in a moment, I can pull an oracle deck like that, pull a single card, and then see what I need, and then decide what tarot decks I can use to further flesh out that message. And then to use something like the Garden Dragons, which is super specific and exists in a unique, very tailored, very structured world of its own, but I'm still able to pull out those different messages and different energies by just simply letting the oracle card dictate what sort of a energy and what sort of a tarot deck I'm going to pair with that to further expand upon that energy. I think it's really fun. It's a great way for me to also work with my oracle decks in different ways. So rather than, you know, pulling the oracle deck as the sort of support to the tarot, I'm working with the oracle deck as the key element, and the tarot then becomes the structure behind that, which I think is a wonderful way to work with tarot and oracle together. It's also just a lot of fun as well. Like, let's be honest, we can have fun with our cards. That's totally cool too. Sometimes when I want to do a reading and I just want to play with my cards, but I don't really have anything in specific that I want to do a reading about, or a specific practice that I'm engaging in, I just want to have a play, I will just pull whatever oracle deck I feel called to in the moment. I'll shuffle, pull a card, and let it determine what tarot deck I will then pair with it. In a broad sense, most oracle decks, even when they're like very tied into like a specific energy can still resonate with various frequencies of that energy, let's say. And I can use the tarot to further expand upon that, which I think is just really fun. It's a great way to interact with my oracle cards. It is a great way, a great exercise for practicing intuitive reading, because a lot of what I did here was based in intuitive work. Not even so much intuitive reading, right? Because I can pull an oracle and that's my focus, and I can pull 3 tarot cards and I can assign positions to them and give them a very specific structure. But once I pull that oracle card, it really is an exercise in intuitive processing in order to figure out what tarot deck would sort of pair best with that, but really would help reflect the energy back to the oracle and expand upon it in a meaningful way. I find it to be actually really helpful, but it's also really fun way to just, have a play with my cards as well. So that wraps up our, I think, 3rd installment. Ooh, should have checked before I opened my mouth, of DIY tarot spreads. So I would love to know if you have a practice like this, or if you try it, if you try this particular spread, this particular reading style, let me know what you think. Feel free to share with me in the comments below. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.